I would like to recognise the traditional custodians of the land on which I am privileged to be recording this vodcast today, the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation, and I would like to recognise their elders past, present and emerging. Hello everyone and welcome back to another episode of the Growth Distillery. I am joined on this episode by Toby Harrison, Chief Strategy Officer at Ogilvy and Dad Gag Extraordinaire, and Dan Robertson-Jones, fondly known as Dr. J, who is a partner and Head of Culture and Futures at Kantar. And this month, we're here to talk to you about youthfulness. Now, Youthfulness, this episode has been, a good 9 months in the making, but I'm super excited to be talking about this and bringing this to market because I can confidently say now that this is a topic that orbits one of the most potent cultural forces right now across Australia. So thank you both for joining me. I can't wait to unpack this really important topic with you both.
Thanks for having us.
So, gents, how did the Fountain of Youthfulness come about?
I think there's kind of two approaches in marketing. There's either splitting and segmenting your audiences and having really direct ways of thinking about how you motivate them to do what you want, or there's kind of broader universal ways of talking to a lot of people. And we were trying to find a way to connect with the biggest, broadest group of people possible and to try and find out what's universally motivating and universally appealing to them. So rather than splitting, we wanted to try and clump. And in doing so, we were trying to find out what's got real gravity, what's got real appeal, and what could be a universal way of talking to people within Australia. And what we happened upon is this thing, which is youthfulness. Not youth, but youthfulness, that happens to be incredibly attractive and incredibly appealing at a universal level. So you might want to elaborate on how we got to it, but truth is, it's a thing, it's real, we validated it, and it's really good.
I think the thing we could, really the ingoing hypothesis that we felt we could see, particularly post-COVID, was a want for people to reset how they live. And with that, really born of that thought, was the idea that youthfulness, to Toby's point, not youth and being young, but youthfulness was an aspiration that would allow us to clump and talk to the many, not to segment and divide at a fundamental level.
And it's funny because, you mentioned everybody wants more growth and I can categorically agree that, when we get engaged in, across those very many time horizons, particularly when it comes to new markets or new audiences, we all tend to default to the young. And I think that this nuance between youth and youthfulness is a really interesting paradigm. And to give you an idea of the chasm that we've got across, less than 10% of marketing and advertising practitioners across Australia, the US and the UK are over the age of 45, yet they represent, 42, 43 odd % of the population. All right, so youthfulness, so how did we go about, for those that are tuning in, how do we go about understanding a topic so nuanced and so expansive?
Oh, well, we had to do a fair bit of research to get under the skin of it. I think the first thing is, like you said, youth and youthfulness are not the same thing. So we had to go away and try and find a model or a frame of reference that could kind of explain what youthfulness is. And our behavioural science team, we engaged with them and we said, is there a psychological model for this thing, something we can use? And weirdly, there wasn't one that existed. So we actually had to go and build one of our own. So we have a psychological validated model for what youthfulness is, but it's quite in depth and it's quite psychological. But the simple way to boil it down is there is a vibrancy and vitality to some people, and that vibrancy and vitality is about wanting to make their world better, wanting to find a better way to live in and engage in the world, and also find a world that makes more sense to them. And that's what youthfulness is about. It's about that pursuit and that search for finding a better world, or a better world for you to live in, and a better way for you to be in that world. And when we managed to decode what youthfulness was about, we started to see the gates open and started to see behaviours and manifestation of this stuff that started to become incredibly interesting. And those manifestations essentially came through in 4 key areas. So people want to make their life better through an expression of identity, for example. They want to find better ways to connect with others. They want to have a new way of expressing their enjoyment of life. And there's one more that I've conveniently forgotten, but it's enjoyment, connection, identity, and success. Yeah, they want to succeed, not just in a professional sense, but the things that they care about, the pursuits that they're into, they want to be successful in. So for me, it was, I want to learn how to do a perfect reverse sear on a tomahawk steak. Nailed it. But that is a youthful pursuit for some people. And once we started to understand the dimensions and the way that people were searching for youthfulness, we started to uncover some really interesting stuff about how it was manifesting and how we might be able to tap into it too.
I want to touch on the ethnographies in particular because, Dan, you got grown adults to go and build stuff at home. Right. And I'd love, what was the most surprising thing? Like what happened? How did, when given the opportunity and we unshackle ourselves from the rigors of adulthood, we saw some truly incredible things.
I think that the most striking thing when we set people a task, which was go and spend a week in youthfulness. So indulge everything that you're passionate about with a very open brief of what youthfulness, we didn't define youthfulness for them. But I think you could see the thing that struck me when we first started to get the packs back from people, the photographs, the video files, all the tasks we'd set them over the course of the day was how much energy and how much diversity there was in the things that people cared about. So massive diversity in what I was passionate about and what individual people were passionate about. And we obviously had a broad range of demographics and geographics within that sample. The really unifying thing was how much material people sent us back. So whatever it was they were passionate about, they were super passionate about it. And beyond, like, they were buying products, they were bringing in things from the rest of their life they were passionate about. I think, was it Warhammer?
Oh, there's crazy stuff. So we don't normally get to do this, but it's kind of fun. But when you give someone money to spend specifically on youthfulness, so we did a big research project. There were 14 week-long ethnographies, but in that, everyone was given $100 to go and just spend it on something youthful. And you're right, someone's just gone, I just want to get little models and paint them, and I just want to make stuff. Or some people thought, oh, well, I'm going to treat myself to a spa voucher. It was a bit rubbish, but, where it started to get really interesting was people were buying toys, but not kids' toys, but adult toys that they wanted to play with. And, some guy bought a pair of Nerf guns for him and his wife to just play at home with. So, whatever you do in your own home, that's fine. But, it was just lovely to see unbridled joy because they've been given permission to go into it. And it was really liberating for a lot of people. And what was kind of interesting to us was over the course of a week, people's understanding of youthfulness changed. Because they've been given permission, because they've been able to indulge it, they really got into it and they started to revel in this thing. And
yeah, because it's a concept that you've never really been asked to unpack, even in your internal monologue. What is youthfulness and how does it manifest in me? Which I think then begs the question: what is youthfulness?
Oh, well, everyone's going to have a different picture in their minds about it. But I think, if you think about someone who oozes youthfulness, it's a nice way to think about it. There's a vibrancy and a vitality to that individual, which is all about they just froth on something that makes their world better or makes their life better or makes their environment around them better. And I think that's what's so consistent is, in my mind and in your mind and probably everyone's, you'll know someone who's really vital, really vibrant, and they're just energized and driven by this pursuit, this search of wanting to make things better. And it can manifest at a very, societal level. I really care about the world that I'm living in, and I want to make it better in these ways at a really broad, almost socialist type manner. Or it could just be, I really care about my little environment, my little corner of the world, and that's what I'm all about, and I want to make life better for the people around me.
And we're gonna double click on that in a little bit. But before we do, for a word on pedigree, I guess. Knowing what we know now, why should businesses care about youthfulness?
Well, it's probably the most untapped but hugely desired consistency across Australian audiences.
Yeah.
So I think, when we're constantly looking for things that can satisfy and deliver value to audiences, we often think in these really specific, narrow channels, but there is a huge appetite for youthfulness right now. We know that post-COVID, people are wanting to change their lives. I think, Dan just touched on it. There's a Control-Alt-Delete mindset that we have right now. We either want to change things, or we want to alter them, or just get rid of them. And because of that, there's suddenly a new appraisal for what we want to do in our lives. Like over 65% of people seem to feel like COVID was amazing because it's got us to reappraise how we're living our lives. It's forcing us to change things, forcing us to try new things. And in that environment, when we're more open, more interested in changing things, more willing to try new behaviours, there's a massive opportunity for brands to service that desire for change in a positive way and in a way that makes people feel good. And at the moment, very few people are doing that as far as youthfulness is concerned.
So the pandemic has acted as a lightning rod, per se, in terms of this need for us to reset and reappraise what matters most. And then we've got this, ever-increasing appetite for change. And because we're more open and fluid, we're more open to brand introductions or reintroductions or, switching and upsizing. You touched on Control-Alt-Delete, Dan. I know that this is a baby of yours, and
right.
I think it's a phenomenally insightful model around how we're going about creating space for new and this, the vibrancy that comes with pursuing youthfulness. So can you talk us through Control-Alt-Delete?
Control-Alt-Delete is a model we really developed off a couple of our big syndicated data sets in Kantar. They look at changing attitudes, aspirations, values, beliefs, etc. What we could see really clearly through the COVID period is a growing want for people to have more control over their own lives, a want to delete, by which we mean kind of get rid of things that aren't working for them anymore, and an openness to new alternatives, different ways of doing things. The model covers all generations. What's really striking about it is 65% of the population are highly engaged with a greater level of control and or a greater level of deleting and alternatives, or all three of those metrics. Point really being, it's the appetite for a greater level of control and willingness to lean into change spans all generations in Australia.
Interesting. But it manifests really differently by generation.
Yeah, so particularly for younger generations, much more open to alternatives. So they weight towards, by and large, weight down towards kind of greater openness to new alternatives in their lives. Older generations looking for more control, but also, by and large, to delete things that are less relevant to them. I mean, Toby mentioned the stat before. I think it's 64% of the population. The survey that was run in the weekend, the peak weekend of COVID, kind of March 2020, thereabouts, where 65 is the same weekend that Sydney sold out of bread makers, toilet paper, and bullets. Interestingly, even at that point, panic in the aisles. 64% of the population said they saw COVID as the reset we needed to reevaluate how we're living. So even in moments of peak panic, it was there what we've seen during lockdown and in the years post the outbreak of the pandemic is a growing appetite to lean into change, to new alternatives. And with it, as Toby was just saying, really a growing appetite, relevance and want for the feeling of youthfulness in the lives of Australians across generations and across the country.
Yep. So let's talk about the model itself for a minute, because I think that this starts to really illuminate the nuance in speaking to different audiences and making what you do more valuable. So first dimension in the model, and I think you touched on this earlier, which is what we call the anchoring orientation. Talk me through that.
So maybe just really usefully, we did a big quant study to try and build this model. And so, over 2,000 people across Australia, all walks of life, etc., to try and dimensionalise what's going on in their attitudes, etc. And obviously, if you think about one dimension is age, anchoring orientation is quite interesting because you're either very societally minded, I care about the world around me, or you're quite self-centric, and that means I care about my world. And that first orientation's kind of interesting because, I remember when I was growing up, I heard this phrase, which is, if you're not a socialist when you're young, you don't have a heart. If you're not a capitalist when you're old, you don't have a head. And it maps really neatly to what we're seeing in Australia. Young people in Australia are very societally minded. They care deeply about the environment, social justice, the liberations that we should all have and the freedoms of all kinds of groups. They're all about inclusion, etc. So their world is very, very big and very focused on that. So their anchoring orientation is about the world, a big society type perspective. But as we get older, what tends to happen is we kind of get sucked into the rhythms of the world that we're living in. Can't rage against the machine. We've kind of learnt that the machine's part of what makes it possible for me to have a mortgage and car.
The machine's paying the school fees.
The machine is quite necessary, but we're kind of working with the machine, and then essentially what's important to me in my life is the little world that I'm curating and the environment that I'm in. So it's not just about becoming selfish, it's just about going, hey, look, my locus of control is smaller, and this is what I need to worry about, and this is what's important to me. So the model is kind of interesting for us because we see youthfulness and what people are really into and pursuing and how that youthfulness manifests. For young people, it's very societally focused. And for older Australians, it's more self-centred.
Yeah, gotcha.
Which sounds mean-spirited, but it's more about the world. That I live
optimising my place within the world versus changing the world in which I live.
Exactly. Yeah.
And so this, I think, starts to illuminate, I think, the subtleties in terms of the language and the messaging and the behaviours, particularly for brands or for industries or for products and services, to talk in a voice that is more attractive. And the next thing that we overlaid was capacity. And I want to spend a bit of time on capacity because you may be mistaken in thinking that capacity is monetary capacity or physical capacity, but it's not. So talk me through capacity for a second.
Okay, so when we were first kind of hypothesizing and trying to build this framework and model, we had some interesting questions on what liberates stuff, but barriers were massive for us as well. And we thought, okay, well, how much are people having literally the ability to engage with what makes them feel useful? And so we started to try and dimensionalize this capacity component. And realistically, it kind of comes to life in three ways. It's, are you energized by what your youthfulness pursuit is? Do you have the time to engage with it? And then are you left feeling positive by the experience of it? Now, for some people, they just don't have much time at all. If you're us and you've got kids and, busy jobs, etc., your time capacity is going to be quite low. But if you're an older Australian, you might have way more capacity, but maybe the things that you're engaging with may not just jazz you as much anymore, and you may not feel like the return that you're getting out of this thing actually delivers. So capacity is a really important metric because it's about, if you found something that, really like positively enthuses you, do you have what is required to engage with it? Because that's where the real fulfillment comes.
Yeah. And so conventional wisdom would suggest then that if I'm to hazard a guess at how the curve should have looked, when you're young, oceans of capacity to pursue things that are youthfulness. And then as shit gets real, and you get crippled by 2.4 kids, a mortgage, an overbearing boss, your capacity drops, right? The rigors of middle age. And then as your kids leave the house and you retire, hopefully with enough superannuation, unless you live in Sydney, in which you're working till you're 150, your capacity, I would say, somewhat returns to, call it, pre-middle life levels.
Yeah.
How far off were we?
Miles. Actually, we were looking at the first cut of the data, and Dr. J's like, this is a bit worrisome, and you coined it as the paradox of youth, which was, we were talking about, we were like, oh, you think, young people got all this time, energy, their knees work and stuff, they can still do stuff that makes them feel youthful. And then we just realised they had absolutely zero capacity. Yeah. It was actually quite sad, and they're struggling, and it's what they're struggling with that's actually probably really fascinating too as well.
Okay, so to Toby's point, Dr. J, how is youthfulness manifesting in terms of our capacity to engage across the country right now?
Cool. So I think the most interesting generation, if we look at it through those lenses, certainly the most striking generation when we first got the data back, were younger generations. Conventionally, you would expect those guys to be footloose, fancy-free, and enjoying their youth. The reality is actually really different. They are the generation that least felt they had capacity to feel youthful. Mixture of isolation, lack of connection to other people, but also a sense of pressure on the things that they needed to be doing with their time in order to meet expectations in life now and into the future, are almost depriving them of their youth.
It's quite a sobering reality, right? That we've almost stolen youthfulness from the youth. All right, and then at the other end of the spectrum?
The really striking thing about boomers was how much they were the generation that most wanted to invest in being youthful. The challenge really for those guys is to bring them in so they feel connected. I think there's a sense when you look through the data for older generations that youthfulness is there and they want it, but they need to feel connected, not just to the world, to Toby's point, but to their world in a more proximate way. So give me the means to be able to connect, to engage with the people I love, the information, the knowledge to be able to be part of youthfulness.
Which presents the amazing opportunity for brands, which we're going to touch on in a minute. But I think I just want to play this back so that it's really clear in my mind and for those that that are listening in. If we hark back to where this conversation began, then we as marketers and advertisers, we disproportionately focus on the young. But what you're saying is that these are audiences that have the lowest capacity of all, right? And so the job to do to really push them in and nudge them into this open and fluid mindset is significantly higher than an audience that might not necessarily on face value be as sexy, but are drinking heartily from the fountain of youthfulness, and have all of the capacity and the willingness and appetite to lean in, but are just missing that last little ingredient to nudge.
I think what's really striking about the oldest and youngest generations in Australia today is that control is part of their experience of youthfulness. Want to feel connected to it. To your point, Dan, the job of giving younger generations the sense of control they're seeking is actually a bigger one than it is giving older generations the sense of connection and control and being part of the world that they want.
There's some really nice colouring in around this. So as well as like a big, massive quant study that we did quite a lot of qual as well. We spoke to a bunch of key opinion leaders. Now, one of them was a young guy who's a very successful YouTuber, and he's massive on Twitch. And my kids knew who he was, so it's like that's the kind of deal. But he had essentially spent his entire youth, and he's in his early 30s, but he spent his 20s relentlessly pursuing the success in his professional career that he was after, to the point where he went, I've actually missed out on my youth. Like I've totally overinvested in professional at the sacrifice of anything youthful. And at the other end of the spectrum, I spoke to a former pro surfer, someone who's now standing for government, he's a politician inclined at a very societal level, even though he's an older Australian, who said, it's so important for me to continue, pursuing youthfulness because it's relevance. It's the stuff that keeps you alive, and when you're my age, well, his age, if I'm not doing this, it's over.
Yeah, you atrophy.
You're gone. And he said, the moment that you feel like you haven't got anything to contribute is the moment you start to die.
All right, so we've touched on the nuance, and I think these governing principles in terms of the what, right? What do we need to do to fuel or to spark the search? I'd like to anchor it to brand for a second, and fundamentally what our job to do is as marketing professionals and business decision makers. What role do brands play in the search, right? So, if this is, the floodgate to decisioning and to pursuing new and to, relentlessly discovering things, where do brands fit in?
We talk about youthfulness as a behaviour. So it's not just a mindset, but it's what we do, and we coined that as the search. The behaviour of youthfulness is searching for new, better ways to do stuff. But there's some literal fuel for the search, and brands can actually help provide that fuel. And the fuel is kind of pretty binary. Like it's just two things. When it comes to my search in youthfulness, I need possibility and I need capability. So possibility is just show me what that better future can be like. Inspire me, enthuse me as to what potentially better can be. On its own, that's fantastic. But if I'm unable to actually deliver on it, it's tremendously frustrating. So I need capability to help me facilitate or materialize that better future as well. Now, it's not that brands don't do this. Some brands are really inspirational and some brands are tremendously helpful. But it's actually how you put those things together and the mixture of those two different things, as depending on who you are or what your youthfulness journey is, that's remarkably nuanced and remarkably important.
And so just to put a quick asterisk to that, when we talk capacity, just because someone has low capacity doesn't mean that they're not engaging, correct? Because what I don't want, people to think is that we're here, telling people just to focus on baby boomers, right? Because far from it, right?
Yeah, I think we kind of realised really quickly, low capacity is a massive opportunity. Like if I'm not getting a lot out of my youthfulness journey because I've got low capacity, I'm the person who needs help the most, right? And that's where brands can be tremendously useful in that. Now, if you're an elder Australian and you have lots of capacity for youthfulness, that's great. You've probably got a lot of money to spend on it as well if you've done well, and that's great too. But low capacity is a massive opportunity for brands to be helpful. Really interesting. There are so many barriers and so many pain points that we can solve for those guys. And then there's journeys for the older people in Australia that they're already on that we can facilitate even more and just enrich that pursuit for them as well.
Yeah. So this is a framework, almost agnostic of backdrop and circumstance. It's just route guidance, so that if you overlay what's their orientation, what's their level of capacity, that should give you a pantry of ingredients to go, all right, how do I speak in a voice that is more appealing for their search? Because fundamentally, we're all on a search, just unfortunately, some of us are on paved roads, others are on rocky outcrops.
Yeah. Look, it sounds overly simplistic to just go, it's about possibility and capability. But, simplicity is the ultimate sophistication. When you look deeply at what those requirements are of the individual, you can start to see real nuance, and you can really start to slice and dice what person A versus person B or person C require, and how as a brand you can be really powerful at helping fulfill that journey for them. And that's where this stuff starts to get really magical. I think we got very excited when we started to realise, no matter what brand you are or what kind of business you're in, if you can understand what you're able to do to help a youthfulness journey, you can make what you do right now more valuable to more people without having to change. You're
Wow.
essentially starting to connect with people on what they want out of life, and you can help them facilitate it and bring inspiration to them. And suddenly your brand's more valuable to them because it's helping them on a journey that they really want to go on.
And what I love about that is that it's not about creating new products and services, as you just said. It's what you already do and how you make what you already do more valuable, which I think is brilliant. All right, Dr. J, let's bring this to life for a second. Wrapping all of this, I guess, in somewhat of a neat little package, if I'm going to talk to Gen Z, what's a rough guide to youthfulness for Gen Z?
Yeah, cool. So for Gen Z, we've said there are all those kind of anxieties and a lot of emotional kind of weight that they carry that stops, that really limits their capacity to feel youthful. The 3 steps, or the 3 key imperatives that we saw coming through to help Gen Z feel more youthful are really firstly around kind of bringing a sense of playful possibility, sense of levity that lifts some of that weight. Give them a sense of control, but a sense of energized control. Here's what you can do. Just stepping that sense of control back and then overcoming any residual sense of lethargy and inhibition through freeing them up. You're just removing a series of barriers that link to the pressures that they feel. Once you deliver those, you're unlocking the youthfulness that they already want, or you're taking away those barriers. You give them back the feeling of youthfulness that they're looking for.
The perceived barriers, right? Because I think the big thing for me
great
was
shout.
in Gen Z was it's the glass cage, right? And the role for brands really is to re-articulate the art of the possible and eliminate some of these perceptions of lack of momentum.
Yeah.
All right, and then in contrast,
Yes.
let's talk about the baby boomers for a second.
So as we said, the thing with these guys is they kind of feel it's bringing them back in and making them feel reconnected to the world, the bigger world that Toby spoke about, also their world, so the people that they engage with. And really this is all around kind of providing a sense of mental stimulation, a sense of invigoration, so that they feel informed, connected, and with it more in control of their own experience of youthfulness. So again, kind of creating that sense of connection, connecting them back to the world, often just through giving them informed opinions around things. Creating a sense of presence in the moment, so the ability to know what's going on today. But also kind of with the older guys, making that sense of control not about invigoration, but kind of bringing it down so it feels measured.
Sense of
Delivers the
agency.
kind of youthfulness that they're looking for. Yeah, it's the right kind of control over my life. To Toby's point, when I don't feel like I'm youthful.
And I think, I was going to say, I think it would be remiss for us not to talk about the curmudgeonly Toby for a minute. Let's talk about the messy middle. How do we talk, as you said, for those that are really, caught in the rigors of middle life, 2.4 kids, how do we, and as you said, I think that this is not necessarily an area that you would want to avoid, right? These are the people that probably need it most, where you're going to deliver the most transcendent outcomes as a brand, right? How do we go about bringing it all together for them?
So for all of us in the room, right? Let's be frank.
I'm the only really grey one, so I know that's why.
Your beard is by far the longest, sir.
Yeah.
It's landing it in the practical realities of their world, right? Like, I think the really big thing we saw coming through with these guys is actually give me things that are pragmatic breakthroughs, little moments where I can bring a sense of levity, a sense of kind of shareable optimism, excitement and joy into the day-to-day. So tangibly, what can I do on a Saturday with my family that will bring a sense of youthfulness that we can share? They're very aware of a sense of responsibility and the things that really, the real sinkhole in terms of usefulness for, classically Gen X, as we talk about them, is the sense of responsibility that you're carrying in terms of other things you need to do for other people.
I think, we've been on this journey for 9 months and it's been really fascinating. And whilst, we were saying at the start, there's no terminology at a psychological level for youthfulness. But the truth is, when you talk to people about it, everyone kind of gets it. And they're like, oh, yeah, I know what youthfulness is. And actually, across all generations, people are doing it and they're searching for it and they're looking for it. So the kind of fascinating thing for us was young people are kind of putting it to the side because they think their careers or professional success is more important. Older people are desperately reaching for it because they want to feel connected, and people like us, like, do you know what, our lives are pretty good and kids are all right. I need a little momentary respite just to invest in myself. I think when you look at it through that lens, you go, this is great. This is a behaviour that all Australians are indulging in, but no brands are helping out with it. Like, no one's actively investing and going, I see you, I see what you're trying to achieve, and I'm going to help you get to it. And that's where the real opportunity is, as far as I'm concerned, because I just think it's such an untapped well of desire that people are already doing. It's like just pushing on an open door. If we can help people with this, they'll love you so much for it.
Okay, to that point, Toby, is there an example of gold standard youthfulness in a brand?
Yeah, I think, and I'm kind of loath to talk about them because they're so big, but they do it so bloody well, and I'm sure that's the reason for their success. But Nike is a remarkable brand because when you think about possibility and capability, they've orientated their entire business around it. So their model for marketing is about showing you possibility. You're an athlete. This is what the future of your athletic potential can be. And they, as a brand, have a marketing behavior which is the bold coach. It's just about inspiring you as an athlete to perform at your best. But they're also all about, how do I help you on that journey? Digital services, tools, utilities, Night Running Club, Nike Plus, integration with technology to facilitate that journey for you. So as a gold standard, that's an entire business that's orientated around possibility and capability put together. But, I'd like to have something a bit more local and something more relative that we can go, okay, well, I didn't expect it, but it works. For me, Autobahn. Oh yeah. You go there on a Saturday, and I'm like, well, I kind of like the idea of four-wheel drive touring or outdoorsy stuff. There's so much inspiration, so much possibility manifest by that brand, and they're constantly engaging with me around what's possible. But also, they are 100% about facilitating that and making it a capacity and capability journey for me. I go in store and they are there helping me, talking me through, educating me, informing me, showcasing to me how I can make simple little iterative processes on that journey. So, there are gold standards on a global level, but I think, we've got gold standards right here. BCF is another one as well. They're doing a great job around it too. So, those would be my examples.
Dr. J, your thoughts?
I think in terms of a more, to Toby's point, kind of a more mundane example than Nike, probably a more everyday example than Nike. I think if you look at something like Oatly or brands in that kind of snacking category, that actually the simple thing and the most powerful thing that Oatly do is talk positively about the life that you could have. Now, they do it through things like the Norman Al show, but they're at least kind of demonstrating, here's what life could look like. Here's what youthfulness feels like. And here are some simple things that you can change in your day-to-day that will make you feel more positive.
And a left-of-centre example that might be hiding in plain sight?
I think... Do we think we could go there with Bunnings?
Yeah, I think what's kind of interesting is Bunnings exists in a category where a lot of the inspiration is done for it, right? You've got the block and a constant obsession with being able to improve our homes. Those guys realise there's no end of possibility in that category. Yes. They're incredibly good on delivering the capability side of it, and I think they do that in quite specific ways. They're reducing the barrier to entry by making prices really accessible, and then giving you on-site access to the information, the coaching, the nurturing of your DIY journey as you go through it. So that capability component is really well serviced.
Yeah, I think in particular on capability, what I really appreciate about what Bunnings does is it diffuses, I don't want to ask too many questions, right? They really nourish the idea that you go in and their staff are on hand for the sole purpose of guiding your journey. And they've built, almost an entire human experience of people that are there to facilitate, those questions and give you the capability.
Yeah, and they're not there to sell you stuff. That's the other really interesting component. I can walk up to a guy or a girl in a red shirt and go, I don't know how to grout this thing. What am I meant to do? Like, I've got this. Is this the right? And they're like, well, actually, you probably don't even need that. This is how you can get after it. And that, that type of behaviour and that type of experience is what makes them so trusted. But also the fact that you've already got the possibility in your mind. It's there. They're just there to help you turn that into a reality as a capability gem.
Yeah. All right. As we wrap this always enjoyable conversation with the two of you, I like to close each of these episodes with a little bit called Through the Looking Glass, and I'm going to ask both of you the same question. Dan, I'm going to start with you, mate.
Yep.
Let's say someone who's tuning in is picking up what we're putting down. Right? They're all in on youthfulness. What would be your 3 rules for that decision maker in terms of tapping into this cultural phenomenon for sustainable growth over the coming year or years?
So I think understand the aspirations of your audience, like as we've said through the course of this, youthfulness and the want to feel more youthful unifies the population, particularly right now post-COVID. I think understand where they want to get to, understand how you can make what you already have useful in that search and overcoming barriers. And I think talk really openly and really optimistically. There's a kind of, from all the brands we've mentioned, there's a real sense that bringing energy and vitality and signifying that in how you engage people makes a huge difference.
I think we could all use a bit of optimism right now. All right, and then a word on what this doesn't look like for those that might misconstrue what you've just said.
It doesn't look flippant. I think the balance in this is actually bringing levity, energy, positivity without looking loose or what's the right way to phrase it?
Tone deaf.
Yeah, man. Yeah. Well, it actually matters to people.
Yeah.
But it's finding the balance between being overly sincere and shallow. There's a real sweet spot in how you start to talk about this stuff.
Yeah, that's a great point.
Well, especially depending what kind of brand you are as well. If you're cat food, trying to take on the challenge of saving the Great Barrier Reef feels slightly
stretchy.
Yeah. But some brands are trying to do that. I think for me the really good brands are good brands because they recognise they're in service of a consumer, and in service of a consumer's needs, wants, and desires.
I love that.
And when we've kind of dug into what youthfulness is about, it's quite easy to start going, brand A can really service a desire for youthfulness if it genuinely provides what customer A is looking for and does it in the nuance that is appropriate to where they are in their search and what their journey is about. So I think, for me, the simple bit is recognise that you have an ability to service customers, deep dive into exactly what it is they're looking to achieve in their lives and what they want, and then go really hard at understanding how your brand is capable of facilitating that search for them and providing the possibility that they require in the levels they require. What it doesn't look like, I'm with you, is something that's inauthentic or overly austere or kind of like self-grandiose. Most brands aren't really that important to people. They can be really helpful and you can really like them, but they're not the most important thing in my life. And I think there's a lot of my phrase is we get it wrong on purpose. Everyone thinks purpose has to be some big highfalutin thing. Actually, it's not really. It's just help people live lives a bit better. That's it. And we know one of the things that people want their lives to be a little bit better around right now, it's this youthfulness thing. Help them. Yeah, don't go too far out of your swim lane.
But make the world a better place along the way.
Exactly.
Gentlemen, thank you as always.
Oh, you're so welcome.
It's been a privilege and a pleasure. And I look forward to our next chat, hopefully on something equally engaging.
Oh, it will be massively engaging. Atomic.